the giant Apache girl appeared at his ranch, with a truth he was not ready to hear. John had always lived a life surrounded by the wide open spaces of his ranch. The land stretched for miles, rolling hills meeting the sky in soft green waves. His mornings began early, with the sun just peeking over the horizon, painting the fields in shades of orange and gold. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wild grass and earth, and he found a certain peace in the rhythm of the day. This peace was something he had grown up with, something his father and grandfather had known, and it had become the foundation of his own life. The ranch was not just a piece of property, it was a living, breathing world. Cattle roamed freely, their low calls echoing across the fields. Horses grazed near the river that wound its way through the land like a silver ribbon. The old barn, weathered by decades of sun and storms, still stood strong, its wooden beams creaking gently when the wind blew. Every corner of the ranch held a memory, from the big oak tree where he had learned to climb as a boy, to the small stone fence his grandfather had built with careful hands. John knew every inch of it, and he loved it with a deep, quiet devotion. Despite the beauty and familiarity of his life, there was a part of John that often felt restless. The routine of feeding cattle, repairing fences, and tending the land was comforting, yes, but it also left him with long stretches of time to think. And sometimes in those quiet moments he would feel a pang of loneliness, a subtle ache that he could not fully explain. Friends and family lived far away. Most days, the only company he had was the wind, the animals, and the occasional passing traveler who rarely stayed more than a few hours. Still, John was content in his own way, though he sensed that something beyond the horizon might one day change everything. One afternoon, as he walked along the far edge of his property, checking the fences that separated his land from the neighboring hills, something unusual caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be a deer or some other animal wandering across the open field. But as he squinted into the sunlight, he realized it was not an animal. The figure walking toward him was human, but unlike anyone he had ever seen. It was tall, impossibly tall, with a presence that seemed to command the open space around it. The figure moved with a quiet confidence, each step deliberate, yet graceful. The closer it came, the more John noticed the details. The clothing was unlike anything modern, decorated with intricate patterns and bright colors that shimmered in the sunlight. There were feathers woven into the outfit, and the fabric seemed both ancient and alive, as if it carried stories from a time long past. John stopped walking. His heart beat a little faster. He had always believed he knew every face that might appear near his ranch, and yet this person was unlike anyone he had ever imagined. She, or perhaps it was a girl, though her size made it difficult to tell at first, stood tall and unyielding, yet her movements held a softness that was almost hypnotic. She did not speak immediately, but her eyes met his with a calm intensity, as if she had known him longer than he had lived. For a long moment, John simply watched. He felt a mixture of awe, curiosity, and something he could not name. The figure carried herself with a dignity that seemed to belong to the land itself, as if she were not just visiting but belonged to the hills and the wind and the river. There was a strange familiarity about her presence, though John could not explain why. Finally she spoke. Her voice was strong but gentle, carrying a tone of authority and warmth at the same time. "I have come to speak with you," she said. John blinked, surprised that she addressed him directly. "There are things about this land, about your family, and the people who came before you, that you do not know. I am here to help you understand." John felt a chill run down his spine. He had lived his entire life on this land, thought he knew every story worth knowing, and yet here was someone claiming that there was more, something he had never imagined. His first instinct was disbelief. Who was she? How could she know anything about him, about the ranch, about his family? But as he looked into her eyes again, he saw something that made him pause. There was no deception there, no malice, only a quiet certainty that demanded attention. He took a cautious step forward. "I don't understand," he said. "Who are you? And why are you here?" The girl. Because now he could clearly see that she was young, though towering in height, smiled faintly. "I am someone who watches over the stories of this land," she said, "and I have come because the time has come for truths to be revealed. Things that have been hidden for generations cannot remain hidden any longer." John felt a strange mix of fear and intrigue. The idea that his life, his ranch, everything he had built and known, could be connected to secrets he did not know was unsettling. Yet he could not look away. There was something magnetic about her presence, something that pulled him forward, even as his mind struggled to comprehend the situation. They stood there for several minutes, neither speaking. The wind rustled through the tall grass, carrying the faint scent of wild flowers and earth. Birds circled in the sky above, as if giving their silent witness to the meeting. John felt a sense of stillness, a pause in the flow of the world, as if this encounter was meant to happen exactly at this moment. Finally, he spoke again, more carefully this time.
"If what you say is true," he said, "then I need to know everything. I need to understand." The girl nodded.
"That is why I am here," she replied. "But you must be prepared. The truth is not always easy to hear. Sometimes it challenges everything we believe about ourselves, about our families, and about the land we think we own." John swallowed hard. He had lived through storms, droughts, and harsh winters, but the storm of uncertainty that now filled his mind was unlike anything he had faced. Still, beneath the fear there was a spark of hope, a curiosity that he had never fully admitted to himself. Perhaps this was the change he had felt lingering on the horizon for so many years, the opportunity to see his world in a way he had never imagined. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the ranch, John and the girl began walking together slowly toward the main house. The cattle watched from a distance, the horses lifted their heads from grazing, and the land itself seemed to hold its breath. John did not know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he felt alive in a way that went beyond routine and habit. He felt as if the land, the sky, and even the past were all conspiring to bring him to this moment. That evening, as the last light faded and the stars began to appear, John realized that his quiet life on the ranch had changed forever. He could not yet understand how or why, but he knew one thing for certain: the appearance of this extraordinary girl was the beginning of a journey he had never anticipated, a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, his family, and the land he loved so dearly. And somewhere deep inside, John knew that he would have to be brave. The truth that awaited him was not just about history or property. It was about who he was, and what kind of man he wanted to become in the face of something far larger than himself. The ranch had always been his sanctuary, but now it was a stage for a story much bigger than his own. A story that had been waiting for him, hidden in the hills and the wind, and in the presence of a girl who was not just tall, not just remarkable, but somehow in ways he could not yet comprehend. A key to the past he had never truly known. When John first saw her fully approach, he could hardly believe his eyes. The girl, no, she was more than just a girl, stood taller than anyone he had ever seen. Her frame seemed almost larger than life, and yet there was a grace in her movements that made her presence feel natural on the wide-open ranch. She moved as if she belonged not only to the land but to the sky and the wind as well, as though the hills themselves were guiding her steps. Her clothing was unlike anything John had ever seen. She wore garments that seemed crafted from time itself, with beads and feathers woven into the fabric, each pattern telling a story he could not yet understand. The colors were vivid, yet earthy, blending perfectly with the green fields, the brown soil, and the golden sunlight. The feathers in her hair swayed slightly with the breeze, and John realized that even small details of her appearance had a weight, a significance he was not ready to grasp. As she drew closer, John noticed the intensity in her eyes. They were sharp, yet full of calm, carrying a knowledge that spanned years, maybe centuries. Her gaze met his with a kind of quiet authority that made it impossible to look away. He felt both small and exposed, like a child caught in a truth far larger than his imagination. And though he was unsure, he felt an unshakable certainty that she had come for a reason beyond chance. She stopped a few paces away from him, standing as if waiting for him to gather his courage. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The wind rustled the grass around them, carrying with it the scent of earth, rain, and the faint hint of wild flowers. Birds circled above, calling softly as if observing this unexpected meeting. John realized that the world itself seemed to pause, holding its breath for what was about to happen. Finally she spoke, her voice deep and resonant, yet soft enough to carry a gentle warmth. "I have come to speak with you, John," she said. The sound of his name on her lips sent a shiver through him. How could she know his name? He had never met her before, and yet she spoke with certainty, as if she had been waiting for this very moment for years. I don't understand," John stammered, trying to steady himself. "Who are you?"
How do you know my name? Why are you here?
The girl's lips curved into a faint smile, patient but knowing. "I am someone who watches over the history of this land," she said. "I have walked its hills and valleys for many years. I have seen what has been done, what has been forgotten, and what must be remembered. I am here to share a truth, one that has been hidden but cannot remain hidden any longer." John's mind raced. He had always thought he knew his ranch, knew its boundaries, its stories, and its history. But now, a presence unlike anything he had ever imagined was telling him that there was something bigger, something he had never known, waiting to be revealed. He swallowed hard, trying to calm the sudden tightening in his chest. "Hidden? What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "My family has been here for generations. We've cared for this land, protected it. What could possibly be hidden?" The girl's eyes softened, yet her expression remained serious. "You have been given this land. Yes, but the stories of those who came before your family are also tied to it. There are debts, histories, and truths that must be acknowledged. I have come because the time has come for you to know them, and to decide how you will respond."
John felt a rush of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and a hint of fear.
The weight of her words pressed on him, heavier than any storm he had ever weathered. Yet beneath the fear, there was a spark of curiosity. He had lived a quiet life, but now, in the presence of this remarkable girl, he realized that he had only scratched the surface of what the land could hold. "Are you telling me my family did something wrong?" he asked cautiously, his voice barely above a whisper.
She shook her head slowly.
It is not about blame, it is about truth.
History is rarely simple, and the land carries the memory of those who lived upon it long before your family arrived. I am here to guide you, to help you understand, so that the past is honored and the present can be just. John's hand shook slightly. He had always believed in hard work, in honesty, and in taking care of what was his. But this presence, this girl, was telling him that ownership alone did not make him the master of the land. There was something more, something deeper, that demanded acknowledgement. As the sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon, she began to tell him stories. She spoke of her people, the Apache, and their connection to the land. She spoke of ancestors who had walked the hills, hunted by the river, and lived in harmony with the animals and the seasons. She described traditions that had survived despite hardship and displacement, stories passed down from generation to generation. John listened in awe. Every word painted a picture of a past he had never imagined. He felt as if the hills, the fields, and even the wind were coming alive with voices from long ago. The ranch he had thought he knew so well suddenly seemed filled with layers of history, each one waiting for recognition. The girl did not rush. She let her words sink in, allowing John to absorb each detail, each story. And though the truth she shared was unfamiliar, it carried a strange sense of inevitability. It was as if he had been waiting, without knowing it, for this moment of revelation. At times she would pause and look at him directly, her gaze steady and unwavering. "It is not an easy truth to hear," she said, "but it is necessary. You cannot move forward without understanding where you come from and where this land comes from. Only then can you make choices that honor both." John nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of apprehension and fascination. He realized that his life on the ranch, so predictable, so carefully ordered, was about to change in ways he could not yet comprehend. And though fear tugged at his chest, he also felt a strange exhilaration. For the first time in years, the land seemed to hold secrets not only worth discovering, but capable of transforming the life he had always known. As the evening deepened, the girl continued to speak, recounting moments of courage, hardship, and resilience. She spoke of the natural world as her people had seen it, alive with spirits and lessons. She described the river as more than water, the hills as more than earth, and the wind as more than air. It was all part of a story that connected her people to this very land. John felt humbled. Every tree, every stone, every blade of grass suddenly seemed to hold a meaning he had never considered. And in the presence of the girl, he felt a sense of responsibility, a realization that caring for the land meant more than tending fences or feeding cattle. It meant understanding, respecting, and honoring the countless lives that had come before him. Hours passed like minutes. The sun set completely, leaving the ranch bathed in soft moonlight. The stars began to twinkle, casting a quiet glow across the hills. John and the girl stood side by side, looking out over the fields he had always known, now transformed by the weight of history and the promise of understanding. Finally, she spoke again, her voice calm but firm.
Rest now, John. The journey of understanding is just beginning.
There will be more to see, more to learn, and more to accept. But tonight, let the land speak to you in its own way. Listen, and you will feel the stories that have waited so long to be told.
John nodded, still processing everything.
He felt exhausted, yet awake in a way that he had never felt before. The ranch, the hills, and even the night itself seemed to hum with possibility. And though he did not yet understand the full truth she had hinted at, he knew that her presence marked the beginning of something monumental, a truth that would change everything he thought he knew about himself, his family, and the land he loved so dearly. As he finally walked back toward the house, the girl remained in the field, her gaze still steady on him. John could not shake the feeling that she was more than a visitor. She was a guardian, a messenger, and perhaps a living connection to a past that had always been just out of reach. And for the first time, he felt both fear and hope intertwining, a sense that life on the ranch would never again be simple, but it would now be far more meaningful than he had ever imagined. The next morning, John woke to the soft light of dawn spilling over the hills. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of the earth after the night. He felt restless, unable to shake the memory of the girl and her words. Something about her presence lingered in his mind like a quiet song he could not forget. He moved through his morning chores automatically, feeding the cattle and checking fences. But his thoughts were elsewhere. The ranch he had known all his life suddenly felt different, alive with histories and stories he had never understood. By mid-morning, the girl appeared again. She stood near the riverbank, watching the water ripple and shine in the sunlight. Her tall figure seemed even more commanding in the soft morning light. John approached her cautiously, still unsure how to begin. "I suppose it's time," he said slowly, trying to match the calm tone she seemed to carry naturally. "Time for what?" he added, almost to himself. She turned to him and smiled, faintly but firmly. "Time for the truth," she said. "You have listened and observed. You have felt the land. Now it is ready to speak to you in ways that cannot be ignored." John's stomach tightened. He had expected stories of the land, of its beauty and history, but something about the way she said truth made him tense. It was as if he were about to open a door he had no idea existed, a door to a past he had never imagined. She gestured for him to sit on a fallen log near the river. The soft trickle of water and the whisper of the wind created a quiet rhythm, as if nature itself were preparing him. Then she began. "Long ago," she started, her voice calm but full of weight. "This land was not yours.
It belonged to my people, the Apache. Your ancestors, many generations back, arrived here and claimed it.
They built fences, homes, and barns, thinking it was theirs to take. But it was not. The land remembers everything. The rivers, the hills, the trees. They remember who walked here first. And the people who walked here first left their mark on this land in ways that cannot be erased." John's heart pounded. He had always believed his family had been the rightful owners, caretakers of the land for generations. The idea that there was another story, another truth, struck him like a sudden gust of wind that rattled the barn doors and sent leaves swirling across the fields. "I don't understand," John said slowly, struggling to keep his voice steady. "My family, we've worked this land for decades. We've lived here. Are you saying we took it from someone else?" The girl nodded.
Not in the way you might think. You were born into the inheritance of your family, yes.
But inheritance does not erase history. My people walked these hills long before your family arrived. They hunted by the river, planted crops, raised children, and honored the land. And yet, over time, their stories were forgotten, their connection to this place ignored. I am here so you can remember, so you can know, and so you can choose how to respond. John's mind raced. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on him, yet he had no idea how to respond. Anger bubbled inside him at first. Anger that history had been hidden. Anger that his family might be judged. Anger at the idea that all he had done and worked for might now feel tainted. But underneath the anger there was something else. Curiosity. He wanted to understand. He needed to understand. The girl reached into a small satchel she carried and pulled out several objects, ancient letters, small carvings, and a faded map. She placed them gently on the log between them. "Look," she said. "These are records that prove what I am telling you. They were written long before your family arrived here. They show the boundaries of the land as it was used by my people, the places they hunted, and the places they lived. This map shows more than land. It shows life, connection, and respect for everything that grows here. And these letters tell of agreements, promises, and trust that were ignored over time. Your family may not have known, but history does not forget." John took the map in his hands, trembling slightly. The paper was fragile, yellowed with age, but the lines drawn on it were clear. He could see rivers, hills, and areas that matched exactly the land he knew. He traced the lines with his fingers, feeling a strange mixture of awe and disbelief. The carvings and letters were even more overwhelming. Names, events, and stories from hundreds of years ago now felt alive in his hands. I never knew," John whispered. "I didn't know any of this. My family never told me, and I've never seen anything like this before. I don't know what to say."
You don't need to say anything yet, the girl replied gently. Understanding comes first.
Judgment comes later. The land speaks to those who listen, and right now, you are listening. That is enough for today. But know this, the land will continue to speak, and the people who came before you will not be silenced forever. John felt a strange wave of emotion wash over him. There was sorrow for what had been lost, for the lives of people who had walked these hills long before his family arrived. There was fear, too, because he knew that accepting this truth might require him to make changes in ways he could not yet imagine. And yet, there was a small spark of hope, a hope that by understanding the truth, he could do something meaningful, something that honored both the past and the present. They spent the rest of the morning walking the land together. She pointed out areas of significance, the old oak tree under which ceremonies had been held, the riverbank where children had played, and the stone circle that marked a sacred place. Each site carried its own story, and John listened intently, absorbing every detail. The ranch he had always thought he knew so well now felt like a living archive, each hill and tree whispering secrets that had been buried for generations. At one point, John stopped by the river, feeling overwhelmed. It's too much," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can handle it all." The girl knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "It is not about handling it all at once," she said softly. "It is about opening your heart to the stories, letting the land teach you, and allowing yourself to feel what must be felt. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward, even when fear is there. You have the courage, John, even if you do not see it yet." Her words resonated deeply. John realized that this journey was not about punishment or blame. It was about understanding, about connection, and about the responsibility that came with knowing the truth. He had spent his life tending the land, but he had never truly listened to it in the way she was asking him to now.
Over the next few hours, she shared more details of the past.
She told him about the struggles of her people, the promises that had been broken, and the resilience that had allowed them to survive despite hardships. She spoke of the sacred relationship her ancestors had with the land, how they respected its rhythms, its seasons, and every living thing that shared it. John began to see that his own life, though grounded in hard work and care, had been missing this deeper connection. By midday, the sun was high in the sky, warming the fields and casting a golden light over everything. John and the girl sat on a hillside looking out over the ranch. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the weight of understanding that did not yet need words. For the first time, John felt the land in a way he had never felt before, not just as property, not just as home, but as something alive, something sacred, something that carried the memory of every person who had ever walked upon it. Finally, John spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion.
I don't know what to do, he admitted. I feel guilty for not knowing, for not seeing, but I also feel, I don't know,
responsible. I want to do the right thing, but I don't know where to start. The girl smiled faintly, her eyes full of encouragement. You start by listening, by learning, and by acknowledging the truth. Actions will come in time, but first you must accept what has been hidden and honor it. That is the beginning of your journey. John nodded slowly, realizing that her guidance was not only about the past but about the future. He felt a determination rising within him, a quiet but firm resolve to understand, to learn, and to make choices that respected both the land and the people whose stories had been ignored for too long. As the day drew to a close, John knew that his life had changed irrevocably. The ranch, once a world of routine and predictability, was now a living reminder of history, of connection, and of the responsibility that came with truth. And standing beside him, the girl remained tall and steady, a guardian of stories, a messenger of the past, and a guide into the unknown future. John realized that accepting the truth would not be easy, but it was necessary. And as he watched the sun dip behind the hills, painting the sky in colors he had never noticed before, he understood that the journey he was about to undertake would change not only how he saw the land, but how he saw himself and the world he thought he knew. The days that followed were unlike any John had ever experienced. The ranch, once a place of simple routines and familiar sights, had transformed into a living map of history and memory. Everywhere he looked, he saw the land differently. The hills were no longer just hills. They were markers of stories and struggles. The river was no longer just water flowing downstream. It was a witness to generations, carrying the whispers of those who had walked its banks long before he had been born. The girl remained with him, a quiet and steady presence. She did not demand his attention, but she was always there, reminding him that the journey he had begun was far from over. At first, John felt a mixture of gratitude and frustration. He wanted to understand, to accept, but the weight of the truth was heavy, pressing against him like the summer sun on the open fields. He found himself walking the land alone at times, wrestling with his thoughts, questioning his feelings, and wondering how to reconcile the life he had lived with the history he was now learning. One morning he stood at the top of a ridge, looking down over the ranch. The cattle grazed quietly in the distance, the horses moved lazily near the river, and the wind rustled through the tall grass. John felt a sharp pang in his chest, a mix of sorrow and responsibility. The girl approached silently, her presence as commanding and calm as ever. She did not speak immediately, allowing him space to gather his thoughts. I don't know if I can do this, John finally admitted. I've spent my whole life thinking I understood this land, that I was doing the right thing by caring for it. And now it feels like everything I believed is incomplete, like I've been blind to something that should have mattered all along. The girl nodded, her eyes kind but unwavering. It is not your fault, John, you did not know. But now that you do, you carry the responsibility to act, to make choices that honor both the past and the present. The land has waited patiently for you to see the truth. Will you listen? John felt a tremor of fear. Acting meant change. Acting meant acknowledging mistakes he had never made personally but that his family had inherited. Acting meant facing discomfort, judgment, and uncertainty. And yet, deep inside, he knew she was right. To ignore what he now knew would be an even greater mistake. He spent the morning walking through parts of the ranch he had long ignored. The overgrown fields, the hidden corners near the creek, the stones placed in patterns that he had never questioned. The girl walked beside him, occasionally pointing out subtle details that revealed the history hidden in plain sight. A small stone marking a boundary, a carved tree trunk, a circle of rocks that once held ceremonies. All of it told stories that had been buried under years of routine and neglect. By midday, John was exhausted. Not physically, but mentally and emotionally. His mind was full of questions, doubts, and reflections. He realized that understanding the truth was not just about seeing the land differently. It was about seeing himself differently, seeing the life he had lived in a new light, and recognizing the responsibility that came with knowledge. That afternoon they sat beneath the large oak tree where he had learned to climb as a boy. The girl placed her hands gently on his shoulders. "You are struggling," she said softly, "because the truth challenges not only your understanding of the land, but also your understanding of yourself. Courage is needed not just to face the world, but to face what you discover within yourself. You have that courage, John. It is time to let it guide you." John closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He thought about the generations of his family who had cared for the ranch, the hard work, the long days, the storms they had weathered together. And he thought about the generations that had come before them, whose stories he was only now beginning to understand. A sense of responsibility, heavy but clear, settled on his shoulders. He realized that his actions now could honor both histories, bridging the past and the present in a way that was meaningful and just. Over the next few days, John began to act in small ways. He started by documenting what the girl had shown him, writing down the stories, the histories, and the details she shared. He explored every corner of the ranch, uncovering hidden places and connecting them to the narratives he was learning. Each discovery brought a new layer of understanding, a new perspective that deepened his respect for the land and its history. The girl guided him patiently, never rushing, never pushing, allowing him to come to his own realizations. She taught him about the traditions of her people, the ceremonies, the connection to nature, the deep respect for every living thing. John began to see parallels with his own life, the ways in which his family had cared for the ranch, but now with a fuller understanding of what care truly meant. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, John felt a mixture of exhaustion and clarity. He had spent hours walking, observing, and reflecting. The weight of history was heavy, but it was no longer oppressive. It had become a guide, a force that could shape the way he lived, the way he cared for the land, and the way he honored the stories that had come before. He turned to the girl. "I think I understand," he said quietly. "I can't change the past, but I can make choices now. I can respect the land and the people who came before me. I can learn, listen, and honor what I've been shown. But it's going to take time, and I don't know if I'm ready for everything that comes next." The girl smiled, her eyes shining in the fading light.
Readiness is not a condition, John.
"It is a process. You are ready enough to begin, and that is all that matters. The rest will unfold as it must." The following days were filled with a careful rhythm. John worked the land as he always had, but now with a new awareness. Every action, feeding the cattle, repairing fences, walking the fields, was layered with thought, respect, and understanding. The girl continued to guide him, pointing out places of significance, teaching him stories, and encouraging reflection. John realized that this journey was not a task or a burden. It was an opportunity, a way to connect deeply with the land and the past in a way he had never imagined. He also began to confront difficult questions. How should he honor the Apache people whose land this had once been? What responsibilities did he carry as a descendant of settlers? How could he balance respect for history with the practical realities of running a ranch? These questions were not easy, and they often left him restless at night. But he faced them honestly, knowing that avoiding them would mean living in ignorance once more. One afternoon, as they walked along the riverbank, John paused.
"I've been thinking," he said. "It's not enough to just understand the past.
I want to make a difference. I want to do something that shows respect, that acknowledges what I've learned. But I don't know what that should look like." The girl looked at him with gentle approval.
That is a wise reflection. Understanding is only the first step.
Action must follow, but it must be thoughtful and meaningful. Start small and let your actions grow from knowledge and respect. The land will guide you, as will the stories you have heard. John nodded, feeling a sense of purpose he had never felt before. For the first time, he saw the ranch not just as a place to live and work, but as a living testament to the people, past and present, who had shaped it. He realized that honoring the truth meant more than acknowledgement. It meant commitment, care, and the courage to make choices that reflected what he now knew. The girl stayed with him throughout the days, sometimes silent, sometimes speaking, always present, as a reminder of the journey he had begun. She shared more stories of her people, of resilience and survival, of courage and respect. Each story strengthened John's understanding and deepened his connection to the land. He began to feel a sense of belonging, not just as a caretaker of property, but as a participant in a much larger story that spanned generations.
By the end of the week, John felt a transformation within himself.
He had confronted the truth, faced his doubts, reflected deeply on his responsibilities, and begun to take steps toward action. The ranch was no longer just his inheritance. It was a living memory, a sacred place that demanded respect and understanding. And standing beside him, the girl remained a steady presence, guiding him, encouraging him, and reminding him that the journey was ongoing. As the sun set on another day, casting golden light across the hills and fields, John realized something profound. The challenge was not over, and the work had only just begun. But he no longer felt fear or helplessness. He felt courage, purpose, and a growing sense of connection. The land, the history, and the stories of the past were now intertwined with his own life, and he knew that he had the power to honor them, to make choices that reflected understanding, and to create a legacy that respected both past and present. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustling of the wind through the grass, the faint call of an owl, John understood that the journey he had begun with the girl was changing him. He was no longer just a man living on a ranch. He was a keeper of stories, a witness to history, and a participant in a legacy far greater than himself. And though the road ahead would be difficult, he felt ready to face it, one step at a time, with honesty, courage, and respect. By the time the sun rose over the hills, John had already made a decision. The events of the past weeks, the sudden appearance of the giant Apache girl, the stories she had shared, and the truth about his family's land, had changed him in ways he could not ignore. He realized that the knowledge he had gained was not something to be feared or avoided, but something to honor. He had a responsibility, not just to himself, but to the generations that had come before him, and to those who would come after. The girl was waiting near the riverbank, as she always had been, her tall figure standing quietly in the morning light. She watched him approach with a calm intensity that reminded him of why he was here. Not just to hear the truth, but to act upon it.
"I've made up my mind," John said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to honor what you've shown me."
I want to do what I can to respect the land and the people who walked it long before my family arrived. The girl's eyes softened.
"That is the right path," she said. "But remember, respect is not just words, it is action.
It will require patience, courage, and commitment. The land will respond to your efforts, and so will the people whose stories you now carry."
John nodded. He knew the task would not be easy.
There were neighbors and family members who would resist, who might not understand why he was making changes, or why he felt compelled to act. But for the first time, he felt that the weight of their judgment did not matter. What mattered was doing what was right, and honoring the truth that had been revealed to him. At first, he felt nervous, unsure if they would even listen. But when he explained who he was, the ranch he had inherited, and the stories the girl had shared with him, their response was measured cautious but not hostile. They could see the sincerity in his voice, the honesty in his eyes, and they agreed to meet him on the land to share their perspectives, traditions, and advice. The meetings were emotional and enlightening. John learned about rituals and customs that had been practiced for centuries, the sacred places on his property, and the stories tied to every hill, tree, and river bend. He listened with humility, realizing that this knowledge was far more valuable than any material possession. Each story, each memory deepened his connection to the land and strengthened his resolve to act with integrity. Back on the ranch, John began small, meaningful changes. He marked sacred areas with respect, leaving certain spaces untouched and allowing them to thrive naturally. He worked to restore parts of the land that had been damaged or neglected, planting native trees, preserving riverbanks, and ensuring that the wildlife could flourish. Each action was deliberate, a tangible way of honoring the past while caring for the present. The girl watched him closely, offering guidance when needed but never pushing. She taught him about ceremonies that honored the land and its people, showing him how to connect spiritually with the environment. John learned to listen, not just with his ears, but with his heart, to the subtle messages of the land. The wind through the grass, the ripple of water, the flight of birds. They all carried meaning, and John began to understand that he was part of a living, breathing story that stretched far beyond his own life. As the weeks turned into months, the ranch transformed. It was still the home he had always known, still the place where he had worked tirelessly, but now it carried a deeper significance. Visitors from the Apache community came to share ceremonies, storytelling, and celebrations of culture. John became a bridge between two worlds, learning to respect and honor the history of the land while continuing to care for it, as his family had for generations. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and painted the hills in golden light, John stood with the girl on a ridge overlooking the ranch. The river sparkled below, the cattle grazed peacefully, and the wind whispered softly through the trees. For the first time, John felt a profound sense of harmony. He had faced the truth, confronted the challenges it brought, and taken meaningful action to honor both the past and the present.
I can't thank you enough, John said, his voice quiet but filled with gratitude.
You came into my life and showed me a truth I wasn't ready to hear, and yet I needed to hear it. I feel like I've been given a gift I don't deserve. The girl smiled faintly, her eyes shining with calm approval.
You earned it, John, she said.
By listening, by learning, by acting with sincerity and respect. That is all that is needed. John looked out over the ranch, taking in the vast fields, the river, and the hills that had always been his home. He realized that this land was no longer just a place to live. It was a story, a connection, a legacy, and he felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that his actions would carry forward the lessons he had learned and honor the people whose history had been hidden for too long. The girl began to speak of her departure. She had come with a mission, and now that the truth had been acknowledged and steps taken to honor it, her presence was no longer needed in the same way. John felt a pang of sadness. She had become a guide, a mentor, and a friend, and the thought of losing her presence was difficult. I will not leave entirely, she said, reading his expression.
My work here is done for now, but I will always be connected to this land and to you. You carry the truth now, and that is more important than my presence.
Remember what you have learned, and continue to act with respect and courage. That is all that matters. John nodded, understanding the significance of her words. Her departure was not an ending, but a transition. The responsibility was now his, and he felt ready to carry it forward with determination and honor. In the weeks following her departure, John continued his work with renewed energy. He created a small space on the ranch dedicated to remembering the history of the land, including markers, signs, and educational areas where visitors could learn about the Apache people and their connection to the land. He hosted gatherings where stories were shared, songs were sung, and traditions were honored. The ranch became not just a home, but a living tribute to the resilience, wisdom, and culture of the people who had come before him. John also reflected on his personal growth. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and doubt, yet he had chosen to act with courage and integrity. He had learned to listen deeply, to honor history, and to understand the importance of connection to the land, to people, and to the stories that shape the world. He felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known, a deep peace that came from knowing he was living in alignment with truth and respect. Years passed, and the ranch thrived in ways John had never imagined. The land was healthier, the wildlife more abundant, and the connections with the Apache community grew stronger. John became a respected figure in both communities, known not for wealth or power, but for his dedication, understanding, and willingness to act with humility and honor. Sometimes on quiet evenings he would stand on the ridge where he had first spoken with the girl, looking out over the land. He would feel the wind on his face, hear the gentle call of the river, and sense the presence of the past in a way that brought comfort and clarity. He knew that the journey of understanding and respect was ongoing, and that he would continue to learn, reflect, and act for the rest of his life. And though the giant Apache girl was no longer physically present, her lessons, guidance, and wisdom remained with him, woven into every action, every choice, and every step he took across the ranch. She had given him more than knowledge. She had given him a way to live with purpose, honor, and connection to something far greater than himself. John realized that the truth he had once feared was now a source of strength. By facing it, embracing it, and acting upon it, he had transformed not only the ranch but his own life. The land was no longer just a home. It was a living testament to history, respect, and the courage to honor the past while shaping the future. And as he watched the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, John smiled. He knew that the journey was never truly complete, that learning and growth would continue. But he also knew that he was ready to live with awareness, ready to honor the stories that had been hidden, and ready to carry the legacy of the land with humility, courage, and respect. For the first time in his life, John felt fully connected to the land, to the past, and to the life he had always wanted to live. The giant Apache girl had appeared at his ranch with a truth he was not ready to hear, and yet that truth had transformed him completely. And in that transformation he discovered something he had never imagined. The power of listening, learning, and acting with integrity could change not only a life, but a world.